Hello and welcome to Unfair Structures, Why America is Racist. I'm Dr. Ali Thomas.
And I am Dr. Gemma Nonog.
We are grateful to Dr. Jerry Garcia for content related to Chicano history. We begin with an acknowledgement that the present-day United States was founded on the territory of over 500 nations. We are grateful to the original inhabitants and stewards of the land on which we now sit, the coastal Salish people, including the Chehalis, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Snohomish, Snoqualmie, and others. David Williams talks about America as the house that racism built. Racism is baked into every facet of US society. Its presence in one sector reinforces itself in every other one. Our purpose today is to review the historical antecedents which underlie and interconnect the structures within this system. What is racism? Kamara Jones defines racism as a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how we look that unfairly disadvantages some, advantages others, and saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. Ibram Kendi defines it as a collection of policies and ideas that create and maintain racial inequities. People and organizations and nations can be either racist or anti-racist. Anti-racism is creating and supporting policies that lead towards racial equity. Today, we'll discuss the following sections. We'll begin with La Raza, origin of Chicano identity. From the 1848 conquest of northern Mexico by the US until now, Mexicans have comprised the largest group of Latinx Americans, yet they've never lived without the contempt of white Americans, as stated by Abraham Lincoln himself. The people of Mexico are most decidedly a race of mongrels. I understand that there is not one person there out of 8 who is pure white. Mexican history is inseparable from the history of Mesoamerican indigenous people, whose civilizations date back thousands of years. Of these, we'll focus on the Mexica, commonly called the Aztecs. The Mexica were a militarily aggressive tribe in the valley of Mexico, who eventually settled on an island in Lake Texcoco, founding the city Tenochtitlan in 1325. 1 century later, 3 indigenous communities rose up against the ruling Azcapotzalco, the Ecolua of Texcoco, the Tepanix of Tolocopan, and the Mexica of Tenochtitlan. This tripartite alliance established the Cahoca Mexica Empire that reached both coasts and left intact smaller vassal states to pay tribute, offer warriors, and submit hostages for ritual sacrifice. The Mexica grew to dominate this growing empire, and Tenochtitlan became one of the largest cities in the world, dwarfing London. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1519, they found willing allies among the vassal civilizations of Mesoamerica. Spanish invasion was brutal, vicious, and methodical. They eventually captured Montezuma II and later tortured, imprisoned, and finally killed his successor, the last Cahoca Mexica Emperor Cuauhtemoc. Tenochtitlan was renamed Ciudad de Mexico. Catholic religion became central to Chicano identity, uniting the indigenous and Spanish cultures. In 1531, just 10 years after Cortez defeated the Mexica, a Mexica Catholic, Juan Diego, cited a vision of the Virgin Mary on multiple occasions in an area just outside Mexico City. She spoke in the Aztec language, Nahuatl, and requested a church to be established. This vision became not just widely accepted and brought widespread conversion to Catholicism, but established a national identity that superseded and united indigenous and Spanish culture. Both Aztec and the new viceroyalty of New Spain were highly stratified societies. In the case of New Spain, class was based on race. Whites born in Spain were on top, followed by those born in New Spain, followed by mestizos, mulattoes, then Indians, and last Africans. Juanita Tamoyo Lott points out that the colonization of Spanish America was distinct from Anglo-America, in that Spanish colonizers came as single men, conquerors, colonizers, missionaries. Intermarriage, not segregation, was the rule, and an interracial society was the result. Yet many indigenous women did not willingly marry Spanish men, but were raped, forced into marriages, or abandoned after giving birth. The so-called settlers of Los Angeles, all the adults are listed here, reflected the multiracial background that later Americans like Lincoln would stigmatize as quote unquote a race of mongrels. Ironically, as Americans, our collective future resembles the Chicano past. Of the adult settlers, 10 had Black ancestry, 10 had indigenous ancestry, and only 2 were monoracial white. The Mexican War for Independence, fomented by socioeconomic, including racial inequity, and triggered by the 1808 conquest of Spain by Napoleon, lasted until 1821 and was followed by a century of instability. It pitted multiple rebel groups against the pro-Spanish royalists. 4 key figures were Miguel Hidalgo, a priest who led the first stage of revolution but was eventually defeated, Jose Morales, not pictured, one of the rebel leaders in southern New Spain, who was killed by royalists in 1815, Vicente Guerrera, a Black officer of Morales who led the revolution against Spain from 1815, and his opponent, Agustin de Iturbide, a mestizo general who led the last royalist effort to quell the rebellion. Guerrera defeated Iturbide, who then himself defected and allied with Guerrera under the so-called Three Guarantees. This alliance declared all inhabitants of New Spain, without distinction to their being Europeans, Africans, or Indians, are citizens of this monarchy. Guerrera and Iturbide agreement won general support, resulting in the abdication of Spain's viceroy in 1821. Iturbide became the first and only emperor of Mexico, lasting less than 2 years, and Guerrera, albeit under more controversial circumstances, became the second president in 1829 and ended slavery in Mexico, which mostly affected Anglo illegal aliens in Texas. He was deposed and executed, but remains a national hero. After 300 years, only 3,000 Mexicans had moved into Native American lands in California, but Americans were just beginning to illegally enter the Mexican territory of Tejas, seeking lands to grow cotton. As already stated, in the 1830s, President Vicente Guerrera, a Black man, outlawed slavery, which was already negligible outside of Tejas. American immigrants to Tejas were also prohibited. But by 1835, Americans in Tejas outnumbered Mexicans. Stephen Austin was among them, stating his, quote, sole and only desire, unquote, was to, quote, redeem Texas from the wilderness, to settle it with an intelligent, honorable, and enterprising people. Anglo-Americans launched an insurrection in 1836. General Santa Anna attacked the Alamo, but his soldiers were defeated and then massacred by Sam Houston, who declared the Lone Star Republic. In 1846, Anglos continued to invade disputed territory north of the Rio Grande, and that same year, Anglo-American illegal aliens in Northern California revolted under a banner of a grizzly bear facing a lone star. In 1848, the US entered Mexico City and forced the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the war and resulted in the loss of 50% of Mexican territory. Violent Mexican-American or Chicano resistance to the US invasion and racial oppression continued for 50 years, attempting to prevent the transformation of Mexican culture and traditions to white culture and traditions. Chicano identity developed as people found themselves in the so-called borderlands of former northern Mexico. Californios in the late 1850s referred to themselves as La Raza Latina, or Latinos. This term was popularized by 1925 Mexican presidential candidate Jose Vasconcelos, who argued that indigenous people who intermarried with the old world people created a fifth universal race, La Raza. Chicano identity, or Chicanismo, originated in recognition of Indian identity, as stated by David Hayes Batiste. No Spaniard has ever suffered undue discrimination either in Latin America or in the United States. Raza, be they Chicanos, Mexicanos, Puerto Ricans, etc., have not been denied access to social benefits because they might have had a distant Spanish ancestor. Discrimination has been suffered because Raza are of Indian descent.